Spirit of life, God, Goddess of many holy names, we lift up those who have shared joys and sorrows and those that remain unspoken, those who are suffering losses and grieving, those who are ill or have loved ones experiencing illness, those who are depressed, isolated, feeling alone, to those experiencing physical pain. May all those suffering find relief and seek out the support of our community. May we remember our many gratitudes, the beauty of our world, and the beautiful moments of our lives, and cultivate more of them. May we hold our precious lives in reverence and also cultivate the good in our hearts, leaving the seeds of anger and selfishness within ourselves, unwatered and untended. May we never hesitate to act out our love, our values in the world. In the name of all that is loving, all that is just, and all that is peaceful and life-affirming. Amen. And I'd also like to share that Hannah Kiley is doing very well after her surgery. In fact, I think she just might be watching or listening today. So we love you, Hannah. So our monthly theme for October is reverence. And today I'm talking, as I said earlier, about reverence for life. If you're like me, you probably do not use the word reverence or revere very much in your everyday life. It's the kind of word that is basically exists to be used on special occasions, I think. If you revere something or have reverence for something, the dictionary says you have deep respect for it. So reverence isn't an exclusively religious word, although some of its synonyms take us to a more religious place. To revere can mean to adore, to deify, to glorify, to venerate, or to worship. And reverence, although it sounds very religious, is not something that you should shy away from. We should revere things that we have the deepest respect for in life, things we are awed by. We should celebrate that which we hold in the highest regard. We should celebrate it with reverence. And questions of reverence, what we revere, are some of the deepest theological questions out there. What in or about your existence do you revere? What for you is worth holding with reverence? These questions lead you to think about your own self, which is usually a pretty healthy thing. In this famous quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, he says that a person will worship something. Have no doubt about that. We may think our tribute is paid in secret in the dark recesses of our hearts, but it will come out. That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our lives and our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship, for what we are worshiping, we become. And I think you can say pretty much the same thing about reverence. What we revere, we are, or we are becoming. Just like worship, reverence can be directed towards things that are good and life-affirming, or it can be directed toward people and things that are unhealthy. Reverence for power, reverence for money, holding oneself in too high esteem can lead to great unhappiness and disconnection from the greater whole of existence. But I think the ultimate healthy perspective on reverence was coined by Dr. Albert Schweitzer. You can call it an ethic, a concept, a theology, or a philosophy. He came up with this idea called reverence for life. But before diving more into the meaning of reverence for life, I want to give you a background on Dr. Schweitzer himself. And this was provided in part by UU Minister Gary Kowalski. So Albert Schweitzer was born in 1875 in Alsace, which is on the border region of Germany and France. He was the son of a Protestant pastor, and from the time of his early childhood, he was known to have an exceptional sensitivity toward the feelings of others. As far back as I can remember, he recalled in his memoirs, "I was saddened by the amount of misery I saw in the world around me. Youth's unqualified joie de vivre I never really knew." Albert's family was not well off. His childhood home was often damp and cold. The young Albert at times had to wear his one thin summer suit all year long. Meals often consisted of 2 large bowls of gruel per day. He recalled that he once had an overcoat that was made out of one of his father's old ones. But knowing that no other village boys had warm coats, he refused to wear it, even when his father punished him. Yeah, of course, he wanted to fit in with the other children, but there was definitely more at play here. A strong recognition of and solidarity with the suffering and the needs of others. Schweitzer's sensitivity was accompanied by intellectual brilliance. By the time he was 30, he was the head of a theological seminary with doctorates in both religion and philosophy, and he was the author of a landmark book on the quest for the historical Jesus. He was also an accomplished musician. He was an organ player, an organ builder, and was a published expert on Bach. You can see he was not an underachiever by far. Schweitzer had a liberal Christian theology, which he developed through his years of biblical research. He concluded that Jesus was a human being and a product of his own history and his own culture. He saw Jesus as an apocalyptic prophet, a messianic Jew, who believed God's righteous kingdom was about to arrive on earth. Schweitzer also believed that the teaching of Jesus, all which took place in the pre-scientific era, should be interpreted through a modern lens. So his acquisition of knowledge and degrees ran at a very fast pace, mostly because he had made a vow to himself at the age of 21. When he was 21, one day he woke from a restful sleep at his home with sunlight streaming through the open windows and sounds of birdsong on the wind. He asked himself, what had he done to deserve such good fortune, to be blessed with such good health, so much intellectual capacity, so much talent? At that moment, he swore to spend 9 more years until he was 30 years old, pursuing his interests as a scholar and an artist. And after that, he would give himself the rest of his life over entirely to the service of humanity. But actually, his service to humanity was delayed 8 more years than he originally anticipated because he decided to study medicine as well, believing that would better equip him for his humanitarian future. As a doctor, he said, he could do more and talk less. So in an interview about his career change to medicine, he explained, "I decided that I would leave the seminary. Instead of trying to get acceptance for my ideas involving painful controversy," again, he was radical in his views on Jesus, "I decided I would make my life my argument. Make my life my argument. I would advocate the things I believed in terms of the life I lived and what I did. Instead of vocalizing my belief in the existence of God within each of us, I would attempt to have my life and work say what I believed." So Schweitzer eventually joined a Paris-based missionary society and was sent to Africa, to the French colony of what is now Gabon, where he was really more about the medicine than about the evangelism. In 1936, he wrote, "As we know life in ourselves, we want to understand life in the universe in order to enter into harmony with it." But Schweitzer did not find harmony in Africa. In Gabon, he bore witness to so much suffering that he found it impossible to imagine, he said, that human life is nature's goal, or that the creative force of the universe even concerns itself with preserving life. This sounds like a crisis of faith to me, but he was a believer in science and reason and continued to struggle for a way science and reason could coalesce with religion. So some of Schweitzer's theological and existential questions were answered 2 years after he arrived in Africa. It's a great story. It was a hot summer's day, and he was journeying by barge. Visions of the movie The African Queen come to mind. I don't know why. But he was on this long trip upstream along a river, a days-long journey to treat a remote missionary who was ill. He was lost in thought on this slow-moving barge. And in his autobiography said, he spent this time searching for a universal concept that could finally join reason with religion. He was writing all sorts of things down in his journals and his notebooks, but nothing really came to him at first. But then he said, late on the 3rd day, at the very moment when at sunset, we were making our way through a herd of hippopotamuses. There flashed upon my mind, unforeseen and unsought, the phrase, reverence for life. I love this. I love that his divine inspiration came through a bunch of hippos. And I'm actually a little jealous that I didn't get to experience a spiritual epiphany among the hippopotamuses, or whatever the plural may be. But this phrase, reverence for life, was written in his native German. And the German has some connotations that kind of transcend the English translation. The German expression of this phrase, reverence for life, has additional connotations of amazement and awe and soul-stirring power, right? So this is more than just, reverence. This is a very deep, emotional, awesome, transformational experience is what reverence for life is to Albert. He said, so that to behold the world and its creatures with real reverence is to be transformed by the vision, transformed from indifference to compassion, and to become a co-participant in both the struggles and the holiness of the earth. This was the meaning of reverence for life, the phrase that became his ethic, his philosophy, and his touchstone for the rest of his days. And Schweitzer really humbled himself to life. He wrote, I must regard other life than my own with equal reverence, for I shall know that it longs for fullness and development as deeply as I do myself. Reverence for life is a universal ethic. We are born of other lives. We possess the capacities to bring still other lives into existence. So nature compels us to recognize the fact of mutual dependence. So mutual dependence, you could call that interbeing, you could call that interdependence, and something that UUs would not even work into their 7 principles until about 30 years later. But he recognized it. Schweitzer sought to widen the circle, believing that only a morality based in nature could meet the needs of an evolutionary ecological age. So Dr. Schweitzer lived to be 90. He spent most of his days of his life at his hospital in the capital of Gabon. He spent it with patients who were fighting leprosy and malaria and other tropical diseases, amongst other things. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1952, they said, for his altruism, reverence for life, and tireless humanitarian work, which has helped making the idea of brotherhood between men and nations a living one. But in the end, he was very modest about his accomplishments. Not everyone he counseled had the resources he'd been given to serve on such a heroic scale. He wrote, whatever more than others you have received in health, natural gifts, working capacity, success, a beautiful childhood, harmonious family circumstances, you must not accept as being a matter of course. You must pay a price for them, right? When we talk about privilege in contemporary terms, he, back in the 50s, was saying, hey, if you have these unearned gifts, these graces you've been given in your life, you are obligated. I mean, he's saying you pay a price for them. You are obligated to pay it back or pay it forward. Of course, Schweitzer was very admired by the UUs. You can pretty much guess why. and he was actually awarded a life membership in the UUA's Church of the Larger Fellowship, which at the time it was the mail order church for those who did not have local congregations. And the Church of the Larger Fellowship, the CLF, exists today for the same purpose, but as an online congregation. And in what I believe may be the most sneaky practice of UU evangelism, Dr. Schweitzer accepted an invitation extended to him by the minister of the CLF. The minister said, "To receive our materials and become an honored member, issued because of your broad sympathy and understanding of the liberal religious position." Dr. Schweitzer replied, "I thank you cordially for your offer. I accept with pleasure. Even as a student, I worked on the problem and history of the Unitarian Church and developed sympathy for your affirmation of Christian freedom at a time when it resulted in persecution. Gradually, I established closer contact with Unitarian communities and became familiar with their faith in action. Therefore, I thank you that through you," remember, not through himself, "I have been made an honored member of this church." Now, to this day, sometimes the UUs get overzealous and claim Dr. Schweitzer as one of our own, but it's not technically true. We kind of tricked him into becoming a member, or flattered him into becoming a member. Dr. Schweitzer, about his own theology or religious leanings, said later in his life, he said, "For a long time now, I have had connections with the Unitarian Church, yet there is no question of my breaking with the Lutheran Church. I am a Protestant, but above all, I am a scientist. And as such, I can be on good terms with all the Protestant churches." But you can see why UUs had such a crush on Schweitzer, right? I mean, he's kind of the ideal UU guy. He was talking about mutual dependence well before our principal. His liberal Christian views were very compatible with Unitarian Universalism, and of course, and most of all, he lived his values. He put his deeds ahead of creeds. He devoted his whole life not to his own comfort, but to making his faith visible through action. He is like the ultimate role model. And it's good he left us with this idea of reverence for life. That's another one of his gifts. This idea is universal, and it's a really helpful theological and ethical concept that can inspire people regardless of their religion or their no religion at all. I mean, reverence for life, it actually comes up in an Eastern religious context as well. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, he identifies reverence for life as the first of 5 mindfulness trainings. These trainings express the Buddhist vision of a global spirituality and ethic. Here is Thich Nhat Hanh's affirmation of the reverence for life. "Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, of animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking or in my way of life. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world." That's Thich Nhat Hanh's reverence for life. Reverence for life can also be really a helpful expression for non-theists, or those who don't believe in the supernatural. There is no supernatural belief required in reverence for life. Reverence for life also goes hand in hand with those who hold nature and the natural world in the highest regard and seek to live in harmony with the earth. So, in our age of cynicism and mistrust and skepticism, a well-directed sense of reverence, such as reverence for life, can be an antidote to much that is wrong with our world. Reverence for life can also motivate us in our hearts to change our world. In some brief words from Albert Schweitzer, by having a reverence for life, we enter into a spiritual relation with the world. By practicing reverence for life, we become good, deep, and alive. There is not much to argue with there. Good, deep, and alive. So today I encourage you to explore how you might practice reverence for life, and then take the steps to make whatever that is happen. May it be so, and blessed be.